The Galactic Military Academy floated in the void between three dying stars, its crystalline structure catching the last light of civilizations that had burned for millions of years. Inside its halls, young beings from across the galaxy learned the art of war, diplomacy, and survival. But there was one rule that every cadet knew by heart: humans were forbidden from military service. Zixara adjusted her breathing apparatus as she walked through the corridor with her study group. Her chitinous blue shell gleamed under the artificial lights, marking her as one of the HFY, a proud warrior race that had served the Galactic Council for over 3,000 years. Beside her, Thorn's massive form cast shadows on the wall. The rock-like granite was built for warfare, his people having evolved on a world where survival meant constant battle against the elements. "I still don't understand it," muttered Veltar, the smallest of their group. The pale, wispy Etherian floated slightly above the ground, his translucent form shimmering with nervous energy. "Humans look so weak. Why would the Council ban them from military service?" Professor Krillax had assigned them to research the Human Prohibition Act for their xenobiology class. It was supposed to be a simple assignment, just another species to catalog and understand. But the more they dug into the records, the more questions arose. "Maybe they're too fragile," Thorn suggested, his voice rumbling like distant thunder. "I've seen the files. They have no natural armor, no claws, no venom. They can't even survive in most planetary atmospheres without artificial support." Zixara flicked through her datapad, scrolling past images of humans. They did look remarkably ordinary, bipedal, soft-skinned with only basic sensory organs. Their homeworld, Earth, was classified as a garden world with mild gravity and a narrow temperature range. Everything about them seemed designed for comfort, not conflict. "Here's what I don't get," she said, stopping at a particular file. "Look at this. Earth had hundreds of separate nations before they achieved spaceflight. That means they fought each other constantly, but according to the Galactic Council records, they were specifically banned from participating in any military actions the moment they made first contact." The group entered the Academy's vast library, a spherical chamber where holographic displays showed information from thousands of worlds. Other cadet groups were scattered throughout the space, working on their own assignments. The air hummed with the quiet intensity of young minds trying to prove themselves worthy of joining the galaxy's greatest military force. Veltar drifted to a nearby terminal and began pulling up restricted files. Being an Etherian had its advantages. His people were naturally gifted at navigating information systems. "I'm finding something strange here." The vote to ban humans from military service was unanimous. Every single council member voted yes, including species that usually disagree on everything. "That is unusual," admitted Thorn. His people, the Granites, had fought the Etherians for centuries before joining the council. The idea that all species would agree on anything seemed impossible. Zixara found herself drawn to a display showing human history. She watched images of their wars, primitive conflicts fought with metal weapons and chemical explosives. The humans seemed to throw themselves at each other with remarkable enthusiasm, but their technology was crude compared to plasma cannons and gravity bombs used by civilized species. "Look at this battle record," she called to her friends. "The humans call it World War II. They managed to kill over 50 million of their own species using nothing but simple machines and basic chemistry. In 6 years. The number hung in the air like a curse. Even the most violent council species rarely lost more than a few million individuals during entire planetary campaigns that lasted centuries." Veltar's form flickered with surprise. 50 million? Are you sure that's correct? That's nearly the entire population of some council worlds. It gets worse, Zixara continued reading. This was just one of their major conflicts. They had hundreds of smaller wars happening simultaneously across their planet. And this was before they developed space travel. Thorn rumbled thoughtfully. Perhaps that's why they were banned. Too violent for civilized warfare. But something about that explanation didn't sit right with Zixara. The HFY had their own violent history, as did most council species. Violence alone couldn't explain the unanimous vote to exclude humans. She accessed another file, this one detailing first contact protocols. The human delegation had arrived at the council chambers 47 years ago, led by an ambassador named Sarah Chen. The humans had been polite, curious, and eager to join galactic civilization. They'd offered to share their art, their science, their culture. They'd specifically requested to contribute to peacekeeping efforts. The Council's response had been swift and absolute. Humans could join as civilians, could trade and travel, could participate in cultural exchanges, but they were permanently barred from any military or police actions, even within their own solar system. "Here's the weird part," Veltar said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I'm seeing references to something called the Vancouver Incident, but the files are sealed. Maximum security clearance required." Zixara felt her secondary hearts begin to beat faster. In all her years at the Academy, she'd never encountered files that required maximum security clearance. Those were reserved for information that could threaten galactic stability. What kind of incident could justify this level of secrecy? She wondered aloud. Their research was interrupted by the appearance of Instructor Velmoth, a tall, graceful being from the Seraph worlds. Her silver skin gleamed as she approached their study group, her movements fluid and precise. "Cadets," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had survived 3 galactic campaigns. "I believe you're researching the Human Prohibition Act." "Yes, Instructor," Zixara replied, snapping to attention. "We're trying to understand the reasoning behind the Council's decision." Velmoth's expression was unreadable, but Zixara caught something in her eyes. Was it fear? "Respect, warning? I suggest you focus your research on documented human conflicts," the instructor said carefully. "Pay particular attention to their tactical innovations and psychological warfare techniques. But remember, cadets, some knowledge comes with responsibility. Make sure you're prepared for what you might learn." With that cryptic warning, she glided away, leaving the 4 friends staring after her in confusion. "Psychological warfare?" Thorn asked. "What could humans possibly know about that? They're barely past the Stone Age compared to us." But Zixara was already pulling up files on human military history, her curiosity now burning like a plasma torch. Whatever the truth about humans was, it was something the entire Galactic Council feared, and she was determined to find out why. The next day found the 4 cadets huddled around a private study terminal in the deepest levels of the Academy library. Zixara had barely slept, her mind churning with questions about humans and their mysterious prohibition. The more she learned, the less sense it made. "I've been going through human military tactics," she announced as her friends gathered around, "and I'm starting to understand why Instructor Velmoth seemed nervous." Veltar shimmered with curiosity. "What did you find?" Zixara activated the holographic display, showing a 3-dimensional battlefield. "This is something humans call guerrilla warfare. Watch this simulation." The display showed a traditional Galactic Council military engagement, 2 armies facing each other across an open field, using advanced weapons and energy shields. Then it switched to show human tactics from their various conflicts. "Humans don't fight like us," Zixara explained. "They don't line up in formations or follow the accepted rules of warfare. Look at this." The simulation showed human fighters hiding in forests, striking supply lines and disappearing before enemy forces could respond. They used the environment itself as a weapon, turning their own planet against invaders. Thorn's rocky exterior shifted uneasily. "That's underhanded. Where's the honor in hiding?" "That's exactly what I thought at first," Zixara replied. "But look at the results. A force of 200 humans held off an army of 50,000 trained soldiers for over 2 years. They used knowledge of local terrain, weather patterns, and psychological manipulation to turn their enemies against each other." Veltar drifted closer to the display. "Psychological manipulation, how?" Zixara pulled up another file. "Humans have something they call propaganda warfare. They don't just fight with weapons, they fight with ideas. They convince their enemies that the war is pointless, that their leaders are lying to them, that surrender is better than death." The display showed examples of human psychological operations, carefully crafted messages designed to demoralize enemy forces, fake radio broadcasts that spread confusion, and elaborate deception campaigns that made small forces appear larger than they actually were. "This is from a conflict they called the Cold War," Zixara continued. 2 human nations spent decades fighting each other without ever firing a shot. They used economics, culture, and information as weapons. They convinced entire populations to rebel against their own governments. Thorn rumbled in discomfort. "This doesn't sound like warfare. It sounds like corruption." "That's the point," said a new voice behind them. The cadets spun around to find Senior Cadet Mordex approaching. The Talon warrior was in her final year at the academy and had access to advanced military archives. Senior Cadet, Zixara said, standing at attention. We were just studying human military history for our xenobiology assignment. Mordex's predatory eyes fixed on the display. Her species had evolved as apex hunters, and she could sense deception from across a star system. I know what you're studying, and I know why you're really interested. She moved closer to their group, her movements silent despite her size. You want to know why humans are banned from military service. The truth is, most cadets ask the same question eventually. The difference is, most cadets accept the official answer and move on. What is the official answer? Feltar asked. That humans are too primitive and emotional for modern warfare, Mordex replied. That they would disrupt the careful balance of power that keeps the galaxy stable. That their unpredictable nature makes them unsuitable for military discipline. Zixara's secondary hearts raced. But you don't believe that. I know it's not true, Mordex said quietly. Because I've seen the classified files. My final project required maximum security clearance, and I learned about something called the Terran conflict analysis. She activated her own datapad and began pulling up files that made Zixara's eyes widen. The clearance levels were far beyond anything a cadet should have access to. 3 years after first contact, the Galactic Council ran a series of war simulations. Mordex explained. They wanted to see how humans would perform alongside other Council military forces. Standard procedure for any new species. The display changed to show a complex strategic simulation involving multiple star systems and fleets of warships. The scenario was based on the Krextar rebellion from 2 centuries ago. The Council forces had won that conflict, but it took 15 years and cost over 1 billion lives. Mordex highlighted certain sections of the simulation data. They gave the humans access to standard Council military equipment and placed them in command of a small peacekeeping force. The human commander was a retired general named Marcus Webb. What happened? Thorne asked, his voice barely above a whisper. General Webb studied the original conflict for exactly 6 hours, Mordex replied. Then he threw out everything the Council considered standard military doctrine. Instead of engaging the rebel fleets directly, he focused on their supply chains. Instead of protecting civilian populations, he used them as intelligence assets. Instead of following the rules of engagement, he made the rebels think their own allies were betraying them. The simulation results appeared on the screen, and all 4 cadets gasped. The human-led force had ended the rebellion in 8 months with less than 1,000 casualties. 8 months, Zixara repeated numbly. The actual war took 15 years. It gets worse, Mordex continued. The Council ran the simulation again, giving the humans command of rebel forces instead. General Webb studied the scenario for 12 hours this time. The result? Complete victory over Council forces in 4 months. Veltar's form flickered with disbelief. That's impossible. Council military doctrine has been refined over thousands of years by the greatest strategic minds in the galaxy. Human strategic thinking doesn't follow our patterns, Mordex explained. They don't just think outside established parameters. They don't seem to recognize that parameters exist. Where we see rules that must be followed, they see suggestions that can be ignored. She pulled up another file, this one showing psychological profiles of human military leaders throughout their history. Look at these patterns. Humans don't just fight to win battles. They fight to change the fundamental nature of conflict itself. Every major human war introduced new concepts that made previous military thinking obsolete. The display showed the evolution of human warfare from simple clubs to nuclear weapons in just a few thousand years. But more disturbing were the tactical innovations, the use of civilians as combatants, the weaponization of information, the concept of total war where entire civilizations became targets. The Vancouver incident, Mordex said quietly, was when the Council finally understood what they were dealing with. Zixara leaned forward eagerly. What happened in Vancouver? Mordex hesitated, then activated another file. A joint training exercise between human and Council forces. Just a simple peacekeeping simulation on a colony world. The humans were supposed to work alongside Kethvi and Granite units to suppress a minor rebellion. The file showed tactical recordings from the exercise. Zixara watched as human soldiers worked seamlessly with alien forces, their adaptability and creativity complementing the strength and discipline of other species. The exercise was going perfectly, Mordex continued. Too perfectly. The human commander, a colonel named Sarah Martinez, had turned what should have been a months-long campaign into a 3-day operation. The rebel forces were surrendering without a fight. That sounds like success, Thorne rumbled. It was success, Mordex replied grimly. That was the problem. The council observers realized that Colonel Martinez hadn't just won the exercise. She had fundamentally changed how every other species thought about the scenario. HFY warriors were using deception instead of direct assault. Granite defenders were adapting their positions based on psychological analysis of enemy behavior. Even Etherian scouts were employing human-style misdirection techniques. Zixara felt a chill run through her exoskeleton. They were learning from the humans. Within hours of working alongside humans, every species in the exercise had begun adopting human tactical thinking, Mordex confirmed. The council realized that humans weren't just another warrior species to be integrated into existing military structures. They were a virus that would completely transform how the galaxy approached conflict. The weight of this revelation settled over the group like a suffocating blanket. Zixara began to understand why the Human Prohibition Act had passed unanimously. They banned humans, she whispered, because they were afraid of becoming like them. The revelation about the Vancouver incident had shaken the group to their core, but Zixara couldn't let it rest. That night she found herself alone in the Academy's observation deck, staring out at the endless expanse of space while her mind raced with possibilities. The next morning, she approached her friends with a new determination. I need to see more, she announced as they gathered for their regular study session. The Vancouver incident explains why the council was worried, but it doesn't explain why they were terrified. Veltar's form shimmered nervously. Maybe we should stop here. We've already learned more than we were supposed to. No, Zixara said firmly. Don't you see? We're training to be military officers. We're supposed to understand threats to galactic stability. How can we protect something if we don't understand what we're protecting it from? Thorne's rocky features shifted into what might have been agreement. She has a point. Knowledge is a weapon, and weapons are meant to be used. Mordex appeared as if summoned by their conversation. The senior cadet had been tracking their research, and Zixara suspected she was as curious as they were about the truth behind the human prohibition. If you really want to understand, Mordex said quietly, there's something else you need to see. But this goes beyond classified files. This requires us to access the Deep Archives. The Deep Archives were legendary among Academy students, a collection of historical records so sensitive that even most instructors didn't have access. The archives contained detailed accounts of every major galactic conflict, including tactical analyses and strategic assessments that could destabilize entire civilizations if they fell into the wrong hands. How do we get access? Zixara asked. Mordex smiled grimly. We don't, but I know someone who can help us. That evening, the group found themselves in the Academy's most restricted section, following Mordex through corridors that few students ever saw. The walls here were made of pure energy rather than matter, designed to contain information that existed as living data. Their guide was Professor Zerthon, a being so ancient that his species had evolved beyond physical form. He existed as a shimmering cloud of conscious energy, his thoughts visible as patterns of light that danced through the air. Young minds seeking dangerous knowledge, he said, his voice echoing from everywhere and nowhere at once. How refreshingly predictable. Professor, Mordex began, we need to understand the true nature of the human threat. Our research has led us to questions that standard files can't answer. Zerthon's form pulsed with what might have been amusement. The human question. Yes, I remember when the Council first grappled with that particular paradox. Very well, but understand that some knowledge cannot be unlearned. He led them deeper into the archives, past barriers that should have been impenetrable. Zixara realized that Professor Zerthon wasn't just accessing the deep archives. He was part of them, his consciousness intertwined with the galaxy's most dangerous secrets. The Vancouver incident was indeed significant. Zerthon began as they entered a chamber filled with floating data crystals. But it was merely the beginning of the Council's investigation into human military potential. One of the crystals activated, projecting a 3-dimensional map of known space. After Vancouver, the Council authorized a comprehensive study of human warfare. They wanted to understand not just what humans could do, but what they might become. The map shifted to show historical conflict zones throughout the galaxy. They assigned teams of military analysts to study every human war, every battle, every strategic innovation. The results were illuminating. Data began flowing across the chamber. Battle statistics, tactical analyses, psychological profiles, and strategic assessments spanning centuries of human conflict. The first discovery was that humans don't just adapt to warfare, Zerthan continued. They evolve it. Every generation of human warriors introduces concepts that previous generations never considered. Zixara watched as the data showed the progression of human military thinking. From simple tribal conflicts to complex global warfare, humans had consistently found new ways to overcome seemingly impossible odds. The second discovery was more disturbing, Zerthan said. Humans don't just fight enemies, they convert them. Look at this analysis of post-conflict human territories. The display showed the aftermath of various human wars. In every case, former enemies had been integrated into human society, adopting human values and military techniques. But more than that, they had become better versions of themselves. Humans have a unique ability to inspire other species to exceed their own limitations, Zerthan explained. They don't just win hearts and minds, they upgrade them. Veltar drifted closer to the data streams. Upgrade them how? Watch this simulation, Zerthan replied, activating another crystal. The Council recreated a historical human conflict, called the Pacific War, using modern galactic military forces. The simulation showed Council fleets engaging in a complex campaign across multiple star systems. The tactics were recognizably human, island-hopping strategies adapted for space warfare, combined arms approaches that integrated different species' strengths, and psychological operations designed to break enemy morale. The simulation ran for 3 virtual years, Zerthan continued. But here's what disturbed the Council most. By the end of the campaign, every participating species had internalized human strategic thinking. They weren't just following human orders anymore. They were thinking like humans, Thorn rumbled uneasily. What's wrong with that? If human tactics are superior, because it's irreversible, Zerthan replied. The Council discovered that exposure to human military thinking creates permanent changes in how other species approach conflict. It's not just learning new techniques, it's a fundamental rewiring of strategic consciousness. Zixara felt her secondary hearts racing as the implications became clear. They're not just warriors, they're teachers. More than teachers, Zerthan corrected. They're evolutionary catalysts. Contact with human military thinking doesn't just improve other species, it transforms them into something new. The professor activated a final set of data crystals, and the chamber filled with disturbing projections. The Council's final simulation was the most terrifying. They modeled what would happen if humans were given full access to galactic military resources and allowed to train other species. The simulation showed the galaxy 50 years in the future. Council space had expanded dramatically, with human-trained forces establishing peace and stability across previously chaotic regions. But the species involved were no longer recognizable as their original forms. The Kethvi had become master strategists rather than simple warriors, Zerthan narrated. The Granites had developed adaptive tactics instead of relying on brute force. The Etherians had learned to use their natural abilities for complex information warfare. That sounds like progress, Zixara said. Though something in the simulation made her uneasy. It was progress, Zerthan agreed. Unprecedented progress. The galaxy had never been more peaceful or prosperous. But look closer at the data. Zixara studied the simulation results more carefully and gasped. They're all thinking the same way. Exactly, Zerthan confirmed. The efficiency was remarkable, but the diversity was gone. Every species had adopted variations of human strategic thinking. The galaxy had become homogenized. The professor's form pulsed with ancient sadness. The Council realized that humans represented the ultimate military evolution, not just for themselves, but for every species they encountered. Contact with human warfare would eventually transform the entire galaxy into a single, unified military culture, and that's why they were banned, Zixara whispered. The vote was unanimous, Zerthan confirmed, because every council member understood the implications. Humans weren't just another warrior species to be integrated, They were a force that would fundamentally change what it meant to be at war in the galaxy. The chamber fell silent as the cadets absorbed this revelation. The human prohibition wasn't about fear of human violence. It was about fear of human excellence. The Council had banned humanity not because they were too primitive for galactic warfare, but because they were too advanced. But there's something else, Zerthan said quietly. Something the Council discovered that made their decision final. He activated one last crystal, and Zixara found herself staring at data that made her entire exoskeleton go cold. The humans, Zerthan revealed, already know. The silence in the deep archives chamber stretched like a void between stars. Zixara stared at the data crystal floating before them, its implications too vast to fully comprehend. They know? She finally managed to whisper. What do you mean they know? Professor Zerthan's energy form pulsed with something that might have been regret. The humans understand exactly why they were banned from galactic military service. They've known since the day the prohibition was enacted. The crystal activated, showing communication records from the Human Prohibition Act debates. Zixara watched as the human ambassador Sarah Chen sat calmly in the council chambers while species after species voted to exclude her people from military participation. Watch her reaction, Zerthan instructed. Zixara studied the human woman's face as the votes came in. There was no surprise, no anger, no protest. Instead, Ambassador Chen nodded thoughtfully at each vote, as if confirming something she had already expected. She wasn't surprised, Veltar observed, his form flickering with confusion. She knew what would happen. More than that, Zerthan replied. She orchestrated it. Another crystal activated, showing private communications between Ambassador Chen and the human government during the weeks leading up to the vote. Zixara read the messages with growing amazement. She recommended that the Council ban humans from military service. Thorn rumbled in disbelief. She told her own government that it would be better for galaxy stability if humans were kept out of galactic conflicts. But why? Zixara demanded. If humans are so superior at warfare, why would they accept being excluded? Zerthan's form shifted to display archived files from Earth's own military databases. Because humans had already run the same simulations the Council would later conduct. They had already seen what their participation in galactic warfare would lead to. The display showed human strategic analyses dating back to just months after first contact. Human military theorists had studied galactic conflict patterns and reached the same conclusions as the Council. Human involvement would fundamentally transform how warfare was conducted throughout known space. Look at this report from Human Strategic Command. Zerthan directed their attention to a particular document, written by the same General Webb who had performed so effectively in the Council simulations. Zixara read the report, her secondary hearts racing as she understood its implications. General Webb had analyzed not just the tactical advantages humans would bring to galactic warfare, but the long-term consequences of their involvement. He predicted exactly what would happen, she breathed. He knew that human tactical thinking would spread to other species. He knew it would create a homogenized military culture, and he knew that such homogenization would ultimately make the galaxy more vulnerable, not stronger. Zerthan added, diversity in military thinking provides redundancy. If one approach fails, others can adapt. But if all species think alike, a single enemy could potentially defeat everyone using the same strategy. Thorn finished grimly. The implications were staggering. Humans hadn't been excluded from galactic warfare because they were inferior. They had excluded themselves because they were too effective. There's more, Zerthan continued, activating another series of crystals. The humans didn't just accept the prohibition. They helped design it. Documents appeared showing human contributions to the legal framework that would govern their exclusion from military service. But these weren't protests or attempts to minimize the restrictions. Instead, they were detailed recommendations for how to make the prohibition more effective. They suggested their own monitoring systems, Zixara read in amazement. They recommended ways to prevent human military knowledge from accidentally spreading to other species. The humans turned their exclusion into a form of quarantine, Zerthan explained. Not to protect themselves, but to protect everyone else from becoming like them. Mordek spoke for the first time since entering the archives. That level of strategic thinking. It's terrifying. They're not just planning for current conflicts. They're planning for conflicts that might happen centuries in the future. Which brings us to the final revelation, Zerthan said solemnly. The reason the Council remains vigilant about the human prohibition even after 47 years. The chamber filled with new data, intelligence reports, surveillance records, and analysis of human civilian activities throughout Council space. Zixara scanned the information looking for patterns. They're still learning, she realized with growing alarm. Even banned from military service, humans in Council space are studying our combat doctrines, our strategies, our weaknesses, and every human diplomat, trader, tourist, and scientist is gathering intelligence, Zerthan confirmed. Not for any hostile purpose, but because humans cannot help themselves. Strategic analysis is fundamental to their nature. The display showed human civilians attending cultural exchanges, trade negotiations, and scientific conferences. In every case, they were unconsciously cataloging military-relevant information, supply chain vulnerabilities, communication patterns, decision-making hierarchies. They're not spies, Veltar said, understanding dawning in his translucent form. They're just naturally strategic. Exactly, Zerthan replied. And that's what makes them so dangerous. A spy can be detected and countered, but how do you defend against an entire species that thinks strategically by instinct? Zixara studied reports of human civilians who had inadvertently identified security flaws in Council installations, suggested improvements to defensive positions, and casually recommended tactical innovations during routine conversations. None of it was intentional, but the cumulative effect was a comprehensive analysis of galactic military capabilities. The Council estimates that humans in civilian roles have gathered enough intelligence to plan effective campaigns against any Council member species, Zerthan revealed. Not that they would use such intelligence, but the fact that they possess it is disturbing enough. The professor activated a final crystal, showing the most recent intelligence assessments. Which brings us to the current crisis. Crisis? Thorn asked. The Devourers, Zerthan replied grimly. Zixara had heard whispers about the Devourers, an aggressive species from outside Council space that had begun probing galactic borders. But the information was heavily classified, and most cadets knew little about the threat they represented. The Devourers represent everything the Council fears about unlimited warfare, Zerthan explained as tactical data filled the chamber. They consume entire planets, enslaving populations and stripping worlds of resources. Their military doctrine is based on overwhelming force and absolute brutality. The display showed Devourer fleet movements along the galactic rim. Their ships were massive, their weapons devastating, and their tactics focused on pure destruction rather than strategic objectives. Traditional Council military doctrine is proving ineffective against them, Zerthan continued. They don't follow accepted rules of warfare. They don't negotiate. They don't retreat. They simply consume everything in their path. Zixara began to understand where this was leading. The Council is considering lifting the human prohibition. Some Council members are already advocating for it, Zerthan confirmed. They believe that human military innovation might be the only way to stop the Devourers before they reach core Council worlds. The chamber fell silent as the cadets absorbed this information. After 47 years of careful exclusion, the galaxy might soon face a choice between maintaining its diverse military culture and surviving an existential threat. But if humans join the fight against the Devourers, Zixara said slowly, everything the Council feared will come to pass. Galactic warfare will be transformed forever. Yes, Zerthan agreed, which is why the current debate in the Council chambers is so heated. Do they risk human military contamination to save the galaxy from the Devourers, or do they find another way to address the threat? Mordex spoke quietly. What do the humans think about this? Zerthan's form pulsed with ancient amusement. The humans, of course, have already prepared for this exact scenario. The revelation that humans had prepared for the Devourer crisis sent shockwaves through the group of cadets. Zixara found herself pacing the chamber, her chitinous legs clicking against the energy floor as she tried to process the implications. How could they prepare for something that only became a threat recently? She demanded. The Devourers weren't even detected until 6 months ago. Professor Zerthan's energy form shifted to display human strategic documents dating back decades. The humans have been preparing for what they call asymmetric existential threats since shortly after the prohibition was enacted. They didn't know specifically about the Devourers, but they anticipated that something like them would eventually emerge. You know, documents showed comprehensive analyses of potential threats to galactic civilization, species that might evolve beyond traditional warfare parameters, artificial intelligences that could turn technology against its creators, and cosmic phenomena that could require unprecedented military responses. Look at this threat assessment from 23 years ago. Zerthan directed their attention to a particular file. Human strategists identified 17 different categories of existential threats that traditional Council military doctrine would be unable to counter. Zixara read the document with growing amazement. The humans had essentially predicted the Devourer crisis down to specific tactical challenges. Overwhelming numerical superiority, complete disregard for civilian casualties, and military doctrines based on consumption rather than conquest. They knew this was coming, Veltar whispered, his form flickering with awe. They knew something like this was inevitable, Zerthan corrected, and they prepared accordingly. The professor activated another crystal, revealing files that made Zixara's secondary hearts skip beats. The humans have spent 47 years developing what they call emergency integration protocols, detailed plans for how to rapidly integrate human military thinking into Council forces in the event of an existential threat. The protocols were breathtakingly comprehensive. Humans had analyzed every Council member species, identifying their military strengths and weaknesses, developing specialized training programs that could adapt human tactics to alien physiologies and psychologies. They've created an entire shadow military command structure, Mordex observed, studying the organizational charts floating through the chamber. Human advisors ready to embed with every major Council fleet, training modules that could teach human tactics to any species within weeks, even contingency plans for species they've never encountered. It's not a shadow command structure, Zerthan corrected. It's a transformation engine. The humans have designed a system that could convert the entire galactic military into a human-style force in a matter of months. Thorn rumbled uneasily. That's exactly what the Council was afraid of. Yes, but look at the safeguards. Zerthan highlighted specific sections of the protocols. The humans have also developed what they call cultural preservation measures, ways to maintain the essential characteristics of each species while adapting their military thinking. Zixara studied the safeguards with fascination. Humans had identified the core values and perspectives that made each species unique, then designed their integration protocols to enhance rather than replace those qualities. They're not trying to make everyone human, she realized. They're trying to make everyone better at being themselves. Precisely, Zerthan agreed. Human strategic thinking doesn't seek to dominate other approaches. It seeks to optimize them. The humans have learned from their own history that diversity of thought is crucial for long-term survival. The chamber filled with new displays showing human historical analyses of their own military evolution. Zixara saw how human warfare had benefited from incorporating tactics and strategies from different cultures and civilizations on their own world. This is how they've always operated, she said with growing understanding. Even on their own planet, humans learned by adapting and improving the military innovations of other cultures, which is why their integration protocols are so sophisticated, Zerthan explained. They've had thousands of years of practice at this exact process. The professor activated a new set of crystals, showing real-time communications between Earth and human civilians throughout Council space. And now, with the Devourer crisis escalating, the humans are beginning to implement their emergency protocols. Zixara watched in amazement as human diplomats, traders, and scientists throughout the galaxy began subtle activities that she now recognized as pre-positioning for military integration. They weren't violating the prohibition. Technically, they remained civilians. But they were preparing to provide strategic support the moment the prohibition was lifted. How many humans are involved in this preparation? Feltar asked. All of them, Zerthan replied simply. The emergency integration protocols aren't limited to military personnel. Every human in Council space has been briefed on their role in the event of an existential crisis. The scope was staggering. Human teachers were prepared to modify educational curricula to include strategic thinking courses. Human engineers had designed rapid deployment communication systems that could coordinate multi-species military operations. Human artists had even created cultural materials designed to help different species understand and adopt human tactical concepts. They've turned their entire civilization into a military support network, Mordek said with something approaching admiration. And they did it while maintaining perfect compliance with the prohibition. Because they understand that the prohibition was never really about keeping humans out of warfare, Zerthan explained. It was about controlling when and how human military thinking would be introduced to the galaxy. Zixara felt a chill run through her exoskeleton as she understood the full implications. The prohibition was never permanent. It was a delay mechanism. The humans and the Council leadership have always known that eventually, an existential threat would emerge that would require human military innovation, Zerthan confirmed. The prohibition bought time for the galaxy to develop enough stability and diversity that it could survive the transformation, the professor displayed. The current state of Council space, 47 years of peace and prosperity that had allowed hundreds of species to develop their own unique approaches to governance, culture, and military organization. Now, when human military thinking spreads throughout the galaxy, it will be absorbed by mature, confident civilizations rather than developing cultures still finding their identity, Zerthan explained. The risk of homogenization is significantly reduced. And the humans knew this would happen, Zixara said, pieces of the puzzle falling into place. They didn't just accept the prohibition, they used it as part of their long-term strategy. A 47-year strategy, Zerthan agreed. Perhaps the longest military campaign in galactic history. The chamber fell silent as the cadets absorbed the magnitude of what they had learned. The humans hadn't been excluded from galactic warfare. They had been preparing for it on a scale that dwarfed anything the galaxy had ever seen. There's one final thing you need to understand, Zerthan said quietly. The Devourer crisis isn't just a test of whether human military innovation can save the galaxy. It's a test of whether the galaxy is ready to become what humans have always known it could be. He activated a last set of crystals, showing long-term projections of galactic development with and without human military integration. The scenarios were dramatically different. Without human influence, the galaxy remains stable but stagnant, Zerthan explained. With human military thinking integrated into galactic culture, the galaxy becomes capable of expansion beyond anything previously imagined. The projections showed exploration of other galaxies, contact with civilizations beyond current understanding, and conflicts on scales that would dwarf even the Devourer threat. The prohibition wasn't just about protecting the galaxy from humans, Zixara realized with growing awe. It was about preparing the galaxy to become something greater. And now, Zerthan said as alarms began sounding throughout the academy, the preparation phase is about to end. The chamber's displays shifted to show real-time tactical information. Devourer fleets had broken through the outer defense perimeters and were advancing toward core Council worlds. The existential crisis had arrived and the galaxy would soon face its greatest test. The Council will vote tomorrow, Zerthan announced, and 47 years of preparation will finally be put to use. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been called for dawn, and Zixara found herself unable to sleep. After everything she had learned in the deep archives, the thought of witnessing the most consequential vote in galactic history left her minds racing with anticipation and dread. She wasn't alone. When she arrived at the observation gallery reserved for military academy cadets, she found hundreds of her fellow students already assembled. The tension in the air was thick enough to taste, and conversations were conducted in hushed whispers that seemed to echo like thunder in the vast chamber. Beltar, Thorn, and Mordex had saved her a place near the front of the gallery, where they could see the council floor clearly. The main chamber was a marvel of engineering, a spherical space where representatives from over 300 species could meet in an environment that accommodated vastly different physiological needs. Any word from Professor Zerthan? Zixara asked as she settled into her observation position. He's on the council floor, Mordex replied, pointing to a section reserved for senior advisors, along with military leadership from every major species. Zixara scanned the gathering, recognizing the distinctive forms of war leaders who had become legends throughout the galaxy. But her attention was drawn to a small group in the human delegation area. The human representatives looked calm, almost serene, despite the magnitude of what was about to be decided. "There's Ambassador Chen," Veltar observed, his form shimmering with nervousness. "She looks exactly the same as she did 47 years ago." It was true. The human woman who had orchestrated her species' exclusion from galactic warfare appeared unchanged by the decades that had passed. Zixara wondered if this was another example of human strategic thinking, maintaining continuity of leadership for long-term planning purposes. The council session began with formal presentations from military commanders describing the Devourer threat. Zixara watched holographic displays showing the enemy's advance through outer territories, their consumption of entire planetary systems, and their apparently unstoppable momentum toward core council worlds. "Traditional defensive strategies have failed," reported General Krikstal of the Combined Fleet Command. "The Devourers don't follow conventional military logic. They sacrifice thousands of their own forces for minimal tactical gains, making standard cost-benefit analysis meaningless." The displays showed battle recordings that made Zixara's secondary hearts race with horror. Devourer forces threw themselves at council defenses with complete disregard for casualties, overwhelming defensive positions, through sheer numbers and willingness to accept losses that would break any rational military force. Their command structure appears to be based on collective consciousness, rather than hierarchical decision-making, continued Admiral Velthox of the Strategic Analysis Division. "Disrupting their communications has no effect because individual units seem to know their roles instinctively." Representative after representative presented similar reports. The Devourers represented a type of threat that traditional council military doctrine had no framework for addressing. They were too numerous to defeat through superior firepower, too distributed to cripple through strategic strikes, and too alien to counter through psychological warfare. Then Ambassador Chen rose to address the council, and the chamber fell into absolute silence. "Honored representatives," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustic systems. 47 years ago, this council made a decision that protected galactic civilization from a threat you couldn't fully understand. Today, you face a different threat that requires you to reconsider that decision." She activated her own holographic display, showing strategic analyses that Zixara recognized from the deep archives. "My people have spent nearly 5 decades preparing for this moment, not because we wanted war, but because we understood that eventually, the galaxy would face a crisis that existing military doctrines couldn't solve." The display shifted to show human integration protocols, but presented in a way that made them seem less threatening than Zixara had initially perceived. Instead of focusing on the transformation of galactic warfare, Chen emphasized the preservation and enhancement of existing military traditions. "We don't seek to replace your military cultures," Chen continued. "We seek to help them evolve to meet challenges that none of us could face alone." She gestured to sections of the gallery where human civilians sat alongside representatives from other species. "For 47 years, humans in council space have been learning from you. Your honor, your courage, your ingenuity. We've incorporated the best of galactic military thinking into our own strategic frameworks." This was news to Zixara. She had focused so intently on how humans might change other species that she hadn't considered how other species might change humans. "The integration protocols we've developed aren't designed to make you more human," Chen explained. "They're designed to make all of us more effective at protecting what we've built together." The ambassador activated a new display, showing projected outcomes of the Devourer conflict under various scenarios. With traditional council military doctrine, the projections showed steady territorial losses culminating in the fall of core worlds within 2 years. With human-enhanced tactics, the projections showed initial setbacks followed by stabilization and eventual victory. "But we understand your concerns about military homogenization," Chen continued, "which is why we've also developed preservation protocols designed to maintain the essential characteristics that make each species' military culture unique." The display showed detailed plans for maintaining Kethvi warrior traditions while adapting them for modern asymmetric warfare, preserving granite defensive doctrines while making them more flexible, and enhancing Etherian reconnaissance capabilities while respecting their cultural aversion to direct violence. "The choice before you today isn't between maintaining your identity and surviving the Devourer threat," Chen concluded. It's between remaining static and growing into something greater than any of us could become alone. The chamber erupted in discussion as representatives from hundreds of species debated among themselves. Zixara could see the conflict playing out across the council floor, fear of human influence warring with recognition of necessity. The debate continued for hours, with representatives presenting arguments for and against lifting the prohibition. Some species worried about losing their military independence. Others argued that their survival depended on adaptation. A few suggested compromise measures that would allow limited human involvement while maintaining restrictions. But as the debate progressed, Zixara began to notice something that the speakers themselves seemed unaware of. The arguments against human integration were becoming more sophisticated, incorporating strategic thinking patterns that seemed distinctly human in their approach. "Do you see it?" Mordex whispered beside her. "They're already thinking like humans," Zixara replied quietly, "just from watching Chen's presentation and studying the integration protocols." It was true. Representatives who had entered the chamber thinking in traditional terms were now presenting arguments that considered multiple variables, long-term consequences, and adaptive strategies. The mere exposure to human strategic thinking was beginning to transform their approach to the problem. "The integration has already begun," Veltar observed, his form flickering with amazement. "They can't help themselves," Thorn rumbled thoughtfully. Maybe that was the point. Maybe this entire debate was designed to demonstrate that human strategic thinking isn't threatening. It's inevitable. As if responding to his observation, Ambassador Chen rose again to address the council. "Honored representatives, you've been debating this issue for 7 hours. In that time, your arguments have evolved, from simple positions to complex strategic analyses, considering multiple scenarios and long-term consequences." The chamber fell silent as representatives realized what had happened. "You haven't become less yourselves," Chen continued gently. "You've become more capable of being yourselves in a challenging universe. This is what human integration actually means, not replacement, but enhancement." The vote, when it finally came, was closer than the unanimous decision 47 years earlier, but the outcome was never truly in doubt. Species after species voted to lift the prohibition, each citing the need to adapt to existential threats while maintaining their essential cultural identity. When the final tally was announced, 847 votes in favor, 127 against, 43 abstentions, the chamber filled with a mixture of relief and apprehension. The Human Prohibition Act was officially terminated, and human strategic thinking would finally be unleashed upon galactic warfare. But as Zixara watched the celebration and commiseration on the council floor, she realized that the real transformation had already taken place. The galaxy had spent 47 years preparing for this moment, and now it was ready to become something unprecedented in cosmic history. The age of human warfare had begun, and nothing would ever be the same. 6 months after the council vote, Zixara stood on the bridge of the GCS Harmony, watching as the largest military force in galactic history prepared for the decisive battle against the Devourer invasion fleet. The transformation that had taken place in those months was nothing short of miraculous. Around her, beings from dozens of different species worked together with an efficiency that would have been impossible under the old military structure. Kethvi warriors coordinated complex tactical maneuvers with Granite defenders, while Etherian scouts provided real-time intelligence that adapted faster than any enemy could counter. But it wasn't just the tactical integration that amazed her. Each species had retained its essential character, while becoming something more than they had been before. The Kethvi were still fierce warriors, but they now fought with strategic precision that multiplied their effectiveness. The Granites remained immovable defenders, but they had learned to adapt their positions in ways that turned defense into devastating counterattacks. "Cadet Zixara, report to Admiral Chen," came the announcement over the ship's communication system. Zixara made her way through corridors that hummed with activity toward the command center. Ambassador Chen had accepted an emergency commission as Admiral of Combined Forces when the integration protocols were activated. It was, Zixara had learned, another element of the 47-year plan. The command center was a marvel of integrated technology and strategy. Holographic displays showed the Devourer fleet approaching from 17 different vectors, their numbers so vast that they darkened entire sections of space. But surrounding them was the new combined fleet. Not just council forces, but an entirely new type of military organization that incorporated strategic thinking from every species in the galaxy. Cadet Zixara reporting as ordered, Admiral, she said, snapping to attention. Admiral Chen turned from a tactical display where she had been consulting with General Webb, the same human officer whose simulations had so impressed the Council decades earlier. He looked older now, but his eyes held the same sharp intelligence that had revolutionized galactic strategic thinking. Cadet, you've been selected to observe this engagement as part of your final Academy assessment, Chen explained. Your research into human military history has given you insights that may prove valuable in understanding what you're about to witness. Zixara felt her secondary hearts racing with excitement and terror. To observe the largest battle in galactic history as it unfolded would be the opportunity of a lifetime, but the stakes could not be higher. Admiral, the Devourer fleet has reached optimal engagement range, reported Commander Velthox, the same Etherian who had served as Strategic Analysis Division Chief during the Council debates. Thank you, Commander. Begin implementation of Protocol 7. Zixara watched as the combined fleet began movements that seemed chaotic at first glance. Ships scattered in apparently random directions, breaking formation and heading toward positions that made no immediate tactical sense. They're retreating, observed Thorne, who had also been selected for the observation program. Why are we running from the enemy? We're not retreating, Admiral Chen replied calmly. We're implementing a strategic concept that humans call flexible response matrix. Watch the Devourer reaction. The enemy fleet responded exactly as traditional military doctrine would predict. They pursued the apparently fleeing Council forces, accelerating toward what appeared to be easy targets. But as they advanced, they began to spread out, following different groups of retreating ships. Now, Chen announced quietly, what happened next would be studied in military academies for centuries to come. The scattered Council forces suddenly stopped retreating and turned to engage, but not in the way any species had ever fought before. Kethvi assault ships used granite defensive techniques to establish mobile strongpoints. Etherian scouts employed Talon hunting strategies to coordinate pinpoint strikes. Human commanders integrated it all into a complex dance of destruction that seemed to anticipate the Devourer's every move. They're not just using human tactics, Zixara realized with growing amazement. They're using everyone's tactics simultaneously. That's the real innovation, Admiral Chen explained as she watched the battle unfold. Human strategic thinking doesn't replace other approaches. It creates frameworks that allow all approaches to work together. The battle raged for hours, but the outcome became clear within the first 30 minutes. The Devourer fleet, despite its overwhelming numbers, found itself constantly responding to threats it couldn't predict or counter. Every time they adapted to one tactical approach, the combined fleet shifted to another, seamlessly transitioning between different species' military traditions in ways that kept the enemy perpetually off balance. Their collective consciousness is actually working against them, General Webb observed. They can't adapt fast enough to counter multiple strategic paradigms operating simultaneously, Zixara watched as Devourer forces that had seemed unstoppable just months earlier began to falter under the relentless pressure of truly integrated galactic warfare. But more than the tactical success, she was amazed by what she saw happening among the combined fleet. Crew's species that had maintained careful, diplomatic distances for centuries were now working together as if they had trained together their entire lives. The integration protocols hadn't just created military efficiency. They had created genuine understanding between radically different forms of consciousness. This is what the humans really gave us, she whispered to Veltar, who was floating beside her in awe. Not just better tactics, but better cooperation. The final phase of the battle came when the Devourer fleet attempted to retreat. In traditional galactic warfare, pursuing a retreating enemy was considered unnecessarily aggressive. The accepted protocol was to allow defeated forces to withdraw and regroup, maintaining the possibility of eventual diplomatic resolution. But humans, Zixara had learned, thought differently about pursuit. Admiral, General Webb reported, the enemy is attempting to withdraw to regroup. Not today, Chen replied firmly. Begin Protocol Omega. The combined fleet transformed again, this time into a pursuit formation that no single species could have conceived. Ships that had been engaged in defensive actions suddenly became hunters, tracking fleeing devourer forces with relentless efficiency. "We're not just defeating them," Thorne observed with something approaching awe. "We're making sure they can never threaten anyone again." "Human strategic thinking includes long-term consequences," Admiral Chen explained. "Allowing an existential threat to retreat means facing it again when it's had time to adapt. Better to end the threat permanently." The pursuit continued for 3 days, with combined fleet forces tracking down every devourer vessel that had participated in the invasion. It wasn't cruelty. Ships that surrendered were accepted and their crews treated according to galactic conventions. But ships that attempted to escape were hunted down with methodical precision that left no doubt about the outcome. When the last devourer vessel was captured or destroyed, the combined fleet regrouped in space that had been terrorized by an unstoppable enemy just a week earlier. But the real victory wasn't just the defeat of the devourers. It was what the galaxy had become in the process of achieving that victory. "Status report," Admiral Chen requested as the fleet settled into formation. "All primary objectives achieved," Commander Velthox reported. "Devourer invasion fleet eliminated with minimal combined fleet casualties. Intelligence indicates no remaining devourer forces capable of threatening Council space. More importantly," added General Webb, "integration protocols have exceeded all projections. Species compatibility ratings are showing improvement factors we didn't think were possible." Zixara understood what that meant. The galaxy hadn't just survived the devourer threat. It had evolved beyond what any species could have achieved individually. As she watched the combined fleet preparing for the journey home, Zixara realized that her original research question had been answered in ways she never could have anticipated. The humans hadn't been forbidden from galactic conflict because they were dangerous. They had been temporarily excluded so that when they finally participated, they could help create something unprecedented in cosmic history. The galaxy now possessed military capabilities that could handle any conceivable threat. But more importantly, it had developed the kind of cooperation and understanding that could prevent most conflicts from ever requiring military solutions. "What happens now?" she asked Admiral Chen as the fleet began its journey back to Council space. Chen smiled with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had seen a 47-year plan reach successful completion. "Now we explore what lies beyond the known galaxy. We've proven we can work together to defend what we've built. The next step is discovering what we can build together." Zixara looked out at the stars ahead of them, understanding that humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy wasn't tactical innovation or strategic thinking. It was the demonstration that seemingly incompatible forms of consciousness could not only coexist, but could become stronger together than they ever could have been apart. The age of human warfare had lasted exactly 6 months. The age of galactic cooperation would last forever.